All right, let's dive into Japanese culture. Looking at these sources, you're clearly fascinated by Japan.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep today. History, philosophy, even those little things that make you go, wait, what? Ready for a Japan geek out session?
Absolutely. And I think a great place to start is with how Japan was intentionally isolated for so long, and that really shaped its culture.
Yeah, this whole land apart concept, almost like a country-sized lab experiment,
Right.
like the Edo period. For over 200 years, foreigners were barred from entering, and Japanese people couldn't leave. I mean, imagine how that would affect a whole nation's mindset.
It's huge, creating a culture in a vacuum, but also think about it, this anxiety about the outside world, that fear of falling behind. It's like this tension, right, between preserving tradition and this pressure to modernize. And that's something that still defines Japan today.
Yeah, I see that's a really interesting point. Okay, so let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. I mean, some of these sources actually go into Japan's creation myth, right, with Izanagi and Izanami.
Exactly. And, it's not just some ancient myth, like, forgotten in some old book. This stuff is still relevant. The idea that the emperor is a direct descendant of those gods, it's still a powerful belief in Japan today.
A living god, wow, that's heavy. And speaking of layers, we have to talk about the Japanese language. The sources make it clear, written Japanese is a beast.
It is. It really is. And we're not talking about just a different alphabet here. We've got multiple writing systems, including kanji, those picture-like characters packed with meaning. It takes Japanese kids years to master it. And even then, they're still learning new kanji all the time.
And then there's the whole no spaces between words thing. I mean, I know kanji helps with that, but can you imagine trying to learn that as a beginner?
It's definitely a challenge. You need a whole different way of thinking about language, almost like you're approaching it visually, focusing on the forms and composition of those characters. And actually, that visual element pops up in so many other aspects of Japanese culture, too, Like, take wabi-sabi, for example.
Wabi-sabi, right. The whole aesthetic of appreciating imperfection, the impermanence of things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like instead of hiding a flaw, you highlight it. Like in kintsugi, where they repair broken pottery with gold.
Yeah.
It's not about erasing the cracks, but making them part of the story of the object.
Exactly. And it's so different from that Western obsession with flawlessness, isn't it?
Totally. And this connects to Zen Buddhism, right? Which, well, it comes up a lot in these sources.
Yeah.
Zen's emphasis on simplicity, on emptiness, it seems to have had a huge impact on everything from Japanese art and gardens to the way people communicate.
Absolutely. And speaking of communication, we got to talk about tatame and hane, those two levels of truth. I mean, this is key to understanding how Japanese people interact, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, takame, the public face you present, keeping harmony, even if it means hiding your true feelings, the hun.
Right.
I actually relate to that. One source mentioned how even after years of working with Japanese colleagues, their politeness would still sometimes throw me off.
Oh,
We'd have a great rapport, but they'd still be super formal.
yeah.
It took me a while to realize, it's not insincerity, it's just them adhering to this very deep cultural norm.
It's a dance, Figuring out those unspoken rules, sensing when it's okay to let that han peek through.
Speaking of letting loose, those nomikai, those after-work drinking sessions, they're kind of a pressure valve, right?
Absolutely. Alcohol helps to, grease the wheels a bit, bridge that gap between the public face and those true feelings.
Interesting. Okay, so I've got history, philosophy, this intricate communication style. But what about the whole samurai thing, the warrior code, Bushido? A lot of sources suggest that those ideals, loyalty, self-sacrifice, honor, they're still present in modern Japan, even if it's not as obvious.
Yeah, it's not like everyone's walking around with a katana, but there is this sense of duty to the group that seems really strong. And it's interesting, Japan has an incredibly low crime rate, and one of the sources links it to this idea of bringing shame on your family or community if you mess up. That seems to be a strong deterrent.
It's not just the law. It's this internalized code, right? So it's not just politeness. It's like this deep humility woven into the culture. One source really dug into this, how it's not just about being modest. It's about actively downplaying your own achievements while praising others. I mean, how does that work in a competitive environment, like, say, trying to get ahead in your career?
It's definitely tricky. You don't want to come across as arrogant, but you still need to show that you're competent, you know? It's this delicate balance between self-promotion and the good of the group.
It's all about giri, right? That sense of obligation, of duty. And it's not just about gifts. It's so much deeper than that.
It really is.
One source even went so far as to say that giri was a factor for kamikaze pilots in World War II. That's intense.
Yeah, Giri is incredibly powerful. It's about this network of social obligations, expectations that define your role within the group. Failing to fulfill your Giri, I mean, historically, that could have serious consequences, even ostracization. And yeah, in the case of those pilots, some believed their Giri to the emperor, to the nation, was stronger than their own desire to survive.
Wow, I'm starting to see how all these ideas connect. Group harmony, duty, this subtle way of communicating. There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, there really is, but that's also what makes Japanese culture so captivating, right? It's this complex system full of seemingly contradictory ideas that somehow work together.
All right, so we've laid some serious groundwork, but I'm curious about the everyday stuff too. Like, the sources dive into some pretty unique aspects of Japanese society, like this whole Soto and Uchi thing, the in-group versus the out-group dynamic. It seems subtle, but really important, right?
Oh yeah, it is. Even if you're treated politely as Soto, an outsider, you're not really part of that core group, the Uchi. It's this distinction that impacts social interactions, business, even friendships.
Right. It reminds me of how Japanese people are known for being indirect when saying no.
Oh yeah.
Like, choto, which means a little, can actually be a polite way of saying no way.
Right.
You got to read
Okay.
between the lines, pay attention to body language.
Absolutely. It's all about preserving harmony, avoiding direct confrontation.
Even when you're being told maybe, it could be a no in disguise. It's fascinating how deeply ingrained that is.
It really is. It's like you're always trying to figure things out, right? The subtle cues, the unspoken rules. But I guess that's part of what makes it so interesting. It's like a puzzle to solve.
Yeah, it's like there's always this extra layer of meaning you got to decode.
Right. And one of the sources talks about how even apologies in Japan can be kind of different from what we're used to. Like sumimasen, which is usually translated as I'm sorry, doesn't always mean you're actually taking the blame for something.
It's not necessarily an admission of guilt, is it?
Not always. It's more like acknowledging the other person's feelings, recognizing that you might have inconvenienced them, even if it wasn't intentional.
Right. It's more like, I recognize that my existence may have caused you some discomfort. It's interesting how that ties back to that ame concept we were talking about earlier, that childlike dependence.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability there, an acknowledgement that we're all connected.
So it's not just about hiding your teeth. It's about this, like, demureness, a sense of restraint, maybe even a bit of shyness, like you said, childlike.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's a big deal culturally. It reflects those deep-seated gender roles and expectations. It's amazing how much a simple gesture can say.
It really makes you think about all the unspoken stuff we do in our own cultures,
Yeah.
right? Things we do without even thinking about the meaning behind them.
Right, and that's what's so cool about exploring different cultures, I think. It forces us to question our assumptions, see the world through new lenses.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of seeing things differently, one source mentions this belief that big ears are a sign of good luck and wealth in Japan.
Big ears. Yeah, I remember reading about that. Something to do with Buddha, right?
Yeah, exactly. Buddha was often depicted with, large earlobes, and they were seen as a sign of wisdom and compassion. And over time, that turned into a popular belief in Japan, associating big ears with good fortune and prosperity.
It's funny how something that might be considered, I don't know, unattractive in one culture can be a lucky charm in another. Really shows how beauty standards are totally subjective, shaped by culture.
It is. It's a good reminder to, approach things with an open mind, to not judge other cultures based on our own values.
Right. So speaking of understanding things on their own terms, I'm curious about one more thing that popped up in the sources. Karakuri, these mechanized puppets that were popular in Japan a long time ago.
Karakuri are so cool. They're these intricate automata, with springs and gears and levers. They were made to entertain and amaze people.
And some sources connect karakuri to Japan's modern fascination with robotics, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like these ancient puppets kind of paved the way for a more, I don't know, positive outlook on technology.
I think so. It's interesting how in the West you often see robots portrayed as threats, like they're going to replace us or something. But in Japan, they're more often seen as helpful companions or, just fun entertainment.
So it's like a cultural tendency to see technology as a good thing, not something to be afraid of.
Right. And you see that in so many ways, right? Like how quickly they adopt new gadgets or, the advances in robotics and healthcare and manufacturing.
Yeah, totally different from how we often view technology in the West, with that mix of fascination and fear. It makes me wonder if there's something about Japanese culture, maybe their deep respect for tradition and craftsmanship, that allows them to embrace new technology without, losing their connection to the past?
That's a great question, and honestly, I don't know if there's a simple answer. But it's definitely something worth thinking about as we, continue to explore and try to understand this amazing and complex culture.
Absolutely. Well said. And, on that note, I think it's a good place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. I mean, we've covered so much ground,
Mm.
right? Ancient myths,
Hmm.
social customs, pop culture, technology.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface of what makes Japan so fascinating.
Oh, for sure. There's always more to discover. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And yet there's still so much more to explore. It's like we've only seen the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Like what's hidden beneath the surface is even more interesting than what we see initially.
Oh, absolutely. I love a good iceberg metaphor, you know. But should we keep going?
Let's dive deeper. I'm really curious about this tension we keep seeing between tradition and modernity in Japan. It's like this constant push and pull.
It's not just about preserving the past while embracing the future, right?
Ah.
It's about finding this, harmony between two seemingly opposite forces.
Exactly. And one of the sources actually brought up this pretty dark example of this, karushi, which means death by overwork.
Death by overwork. That's heavy stuff. It's like the opposite of balance and harmony.
It is. And it's a complex issue. It's linked to Japan's post-war economic boom, when working long hours and being totally loyal to your company, that was seen as like the way to rebuild the nation.
So it's kind of like a legacy of that period of rapid modernization, right? The focus on economic success overshadowing, well, everything else.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale about progress.
Yeah, a reminder that even the most successful societies can have these blind spots, areas where they need to, well, adapt.
And to be fair, Japan is trying to deal with karushi. There are government programs to, reduce work hours, encourage work-life balance, and support people who are burning out.
It's good to hear. It shows they're willing to look at their culture, right? And adjust to the changing needs of society.
Yeah, it's not about abandoning tradition, but finding ways for it to coexist with modern life.
Speaking of finding balance, one source mentioned forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku. Have you heard of this?
Of course, Shinrin-yoku is all about immersing yourself in nature, really engaging all your senses. The sights, the sounds, the smells of the forest. It's not about exercise or hiking, it's about slowing down, being present, and connecting with the natural world.
That sounds incredibly peaceful. And it seems to tie in with how much the Japanese appreciate nature, right? We see it in their art, their gardens, their spirituality.
Absolutely. It's like they've woven nature into their daily lives. They recognize its power to heal and restore.
It's a good lesson for all of us, especially now, in this increasingly urban, tech-driven world. It's so easy to lose that connection to nature.
It really is. We need those moments of peace, of reconnecting with nature, to remind us that we're part of something bigger.
That's a great point. And I think it's a fitting way to wrap up our deep dive on Japanese culture. I mean, we've covered a lot, right? From history and philosophy to pop culture and technology.
We really have.
And through it all, we've seen this dance between tradition and modernity, this striving for balance and harmony.
It's a journey, that's for sure. Challenging, but definitely rewarding, full of surprises and insights along the way.
It's like getting a glimpse into a world that's both familiar and totally different. It challenges us to think differently, to expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly. And as we finish up, I hope we've left you with a sense of wonder and curiosity about Japan.
Need to.
It's a place that's hard to pin down, a place where ancient traditions meet the future, a place where the everyday can be extraordinary.
It's a culture that encourages us to look closer, to question our assumptions, to appreciate the beauty of, well, complexity.
So keep exploring. Immerse yourself in Japan, talk to the people, learn their stories, and let the experience change you.
Who knows? You might even learn something new about yourself along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Japanese culture. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.